So this week, last week I tried to avoid my hardest to avoid Beats Music, as I knew that this week we had to talk about it. It would be impossible really to avoid talking about it, given that the service launched on Tuesday in the US. So Beats Music is built on top of a music streaming service Mog, which Beats acquired in late 2012. Mog itself has been announced will shut down on April the 15th as Beats pushes to migrate users from one service to the other. And of course, Beats Music has been well publicized as it shows a human aspect of music curation by hiring a bunch of people from different radio stations and from different music journalism backgrounds, and also got publications like Pitchfork, Rolling Stone, and even the Ellen Show in the US to put together what appear to be well thought out playlists to help users navigate through the catalog of the company. So the service, as I mentioned, is US only for now, and there is no timeline or international launch as of yet, but it has had some pretty good reviews from, for example, Harry McCracken on Time, Mike Snyder on USA Today, and also Joanna Stern on the Wall Street Journal. They've all had pretty good takes on the service so far. So first up, I want to do a round of sort of first impressions from you guys. I know that in the UK we may not have been able to try the service as of yet, but at least your overall thoughts as far as the screenshots and the reviews that you've seen so far. So maybe we should start with Lucas, because Lucas, you also worked at Mog, so you might have a bit of a more of an inside track on the development of the service or not. But I just want to hear your thoughts on Beats Music today and what you make of the launch.
Indeed. I should also mention another key part of my background was to work at Yahoo Music,
Right.
where I worked for Ian Rogers. So I'm close to many people who are currently at Beats. The first takeaway from the Beats launch that I found was it is a iteration on the idea of on-demand services and of the digital music sector as a whole. They really do advance the product category, and they have been in this product category really from the beginning. Yahoo Music Unlimited launched in 2006 as the second on-demand product, and it was really closely modeled on Rhapsody, which innovated the category. That first generation was about catalog surfing. Rhapsody, in particular, was a big hierarchy of artists' albums and tracks, and you walked through the hierarchy basically with a little bit of search. And then at the same time as that stuff was going on, the webcasting world had non-interactive solutions. And the on-demand and non-interactive worlds have kind of proceeded on their own tracks for the last 10 years, 7 or 8 years really. So this represents an iteration that crosses those two lines of development. It aims to provide a good lean back, non-interactive experience that empowers the listener to have an on-demand experience when they're moved to. So if they want to bookmark a particular song, if they want to search, if they want to play the same song over and over again, if they want to skip however many tracks they want, they can do that. And at the same time, they're not obligated to do like they would with Rhapsody or Yahoo Music Unlimited, Ian Rogers' background, or Mog. They're not obligated to surf the catalog and find things.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. And looking at the playlist side of things, it looks like they've done a very extensive job at creating stuff that people might want to listen to. And as the reviews come in, it looks like most reviewers are finding that the tracks that they are getting are pretty relevant to their current likes and dislikes. So that's definitely a plus for the service right now. And Eamonn, what are your thoughts on the service? Do you think that this could be something that brings people, brings streaming into the mainstream, on-demand streaming into the mainstream, similarly to how Pandora brought internet radio into the mainstream, and makes it a little bit easier for people to navigate immense catalogs of that are available right now on streaming services?
Yeah, I think. It's a bit early to say it's going into the mainstream. I think the very nature of on-demand streaming and a £10 a month subscription automatically puts a ceiling on your potential audience. You're not going to go and get the mainstream consumers because a terrible fact that the music industry doesn't like to face up to is the fact that most people aren't that fussed about music. They kind of like it in the background. They're not obsessive. And the music industry is or should be populated by music obsessives. And that kind of skews the perspective of the consumer. And consumers are happy. There's a lot of consumers happy buying one or two new albums a year and listening to radio. And that's where something like Pandora works really well, because it's put on in the background. It does all the heavy lifting for you. Whereas when you're presented with 25 million songs on Spotify or Beats or Audio or Deezer or Napster or any of these services, it's quite overwhelming. And lots of people would just go, well, they don't really want to hear that. They don't want to hear all this obscure stuff. They want to kind of listen to the charts, and that's absolutely fine. So I think Beats is probably the most well thought out service, certainly based on the reviews and the screenshots that I've seen, and I'm really excited to actually use it, because much as I love Spotify, I think the interface is quite terrible. It looks like a really terrible version of iTunes, which in itself is possibly the worst piece of music software ever released onto a public, and people expect it to use it. It's awful. That's iTunes I'm talking about rather than Spotify. Spotify app has been updated recently and is a little bit better, but it's not a nice kind of user experience. I think what's happening under the bonnet, as they say, is phenomenal. But I think the look and feel of it needs a lot of work. And I think Spotify would admit that, and they're slowly evolving that. And hopefully they don't go the way that iTunes did and make a terrible thing even worse with every iteration. But I'm glad that they took it. It's pretty much a year from Ian Rogers being appointed to them going live with the service, and I'm glad that they took a year to actually look at the things that other services are doing well, but more importantly, look at the things that the other services are doing badly. And I think it's going to kind of raise the bar for a lot of the other services. I think they're going to look slightly fusty compared to Beats, and I think the experience, so that automatically gives Beats a massive head start in the market. But then again, it's that whole thing of converting people to stump up money for it. But I think the most intriguing thing they've done is that deal with AT&T, the $15 a month deal to get up to 5 people on a subscription. That's phenomenal. I think that's the real play for the mainstream. I think so. If it's bundled, I don't know how good AT&T is as a mobile operator in the US. I think they're the second biggest, are they?
It's the biggest, I reckon.
Oh, is it?
I reckon so. Yeah.
Okay.
And one of the two best.
Right. Okay. So it's people get good connections. It's a good service, that kind of thing. Right. Okay.
I mean, I think it's got awful customer service reviews, at least averages, but. Does he not?
One of the best in call quality.
Oh, okay.
They were loathsome, terrible vendor that it's horrible to be a customer. But
so hopefully, yeah. It's I think it should kind of make everybody else up their game, and I think that's got to be really good for the consumer. And I think it was really interesting. Their statement, they came out and they said that everybody's getting paid exactly the same. So all the labels are getting paid exactly the same, which that's intriguing, considering by default Universal have an interest in the service with Jimmy Iovine and all that. So that's intriguing, and I think it's also the fact that they've got lots of artists involved and they're making a real play to be seen as very artist friendly, given the kind of the meltdown last year with Tom York and David Byrne, and Spotify kind of became the whipping boy for all of that. Even though obviously Spotify was the biggest service, but a lot of the criticisms that those people were leveling at Spotify could be equally applied to Rhapsody and Deezer and everybody else about these kind of micropayments. So it's interesting that they seem very focused on the consumer in terms of the experience and the price point and the bundles, and very focused on the artists. And those are the two bits that had kind of been forgotten a little bit in this great technological rush. It was very much just get the stuff out there and get the deals and get the indies on and get the majors in. And I think the consumer and the artist had kind of been left kind of going, well, this is it, this is the train, jump on it or be run over by it. And I think it's really good that they seem to be focusing on both the consumer and the artist. So.
Absolutely. Adam, from a PR perspective, do you find that the way that they set up the release to be sort of a master stroke of PR in the way that they, set up expectations, and then, sort of in a almost like an understated way, because a lot of the communications really were done through Ian's personal blog or through sort of more informal channels rather than big press conferences. So how do you feel about the way that they went about releasing the service out in the open?
I mean, I think it's interesting when they've set out some pretty sort of key messages around the curation, and obviously it was interesting. I think it was the weekend before last. There was like every single US broadsheet I think was carrying details around it. I mean, obviously from our side of the pond, it's really difficult to make any assessments without actually, playing around with it and seeing it in action. I mean, I think that for me I think obviously the successes, or a lot of the successes, will probably be dependent upon the brand itself of Beats Music, and also those partnerships. I mean, the one thing I do wonder about though is who is it actually aimed at?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously a lot of the partnerships with Ellen and Target and Super Bowl are incredibly mainstream. And again, I don't know whether those people are bothered about curation, would pay $9.99 for it, and so on. And then conversely, if it's for the cool early adopters who maybe would pay that $9.99, a lot of those people are going to be on streaming services already. So you're talking about trying to pull people away from Spotify users or Grooveshark users or whoever else. So I think there's some really interesting interesting questions there. And I mean, it was sort of interesting. Noted a couple of tweets that Ian put out this week. I mean, basically saying if music isn't worth $100 a year to you, I'm afraid we live our lives differently. Give it a trial. If you spend $1,000 a year on cable and won't spend $100 a year on music, we can't be friends. I mean, they're quite bullish statements given how competitive that market are, and given how compelling a lot of free services are. So it's obviously going to be quite fascinating how that rolls out over the next months.
I like that kind of side of it, because I think, well, you obviously worked with Ian, and I've interviewed him quite a few times, and he's a really passionate, intelligent guy. And when they appointed him, I was going, right, okay, this isn't going to be just a run of the mill service. This service is going to be really good, because they've got really good people in there. And I think like he's kind of, it's for the CEO or a senior exec to be talking like that. That's having interviewed lots of these people, these heads of service, they don't speak like that, which is, for a journalist anyway, is incredibly refreshing. And the fact that he put up a blog last year which was basically saying this is how you can disconnect your streaming service from Facebook and all of that, and we're never going to do that, and cut out the crap, I think was the line that he used. And I thought that, and I think he's still got that feeling that he's a punter, he's the person actually using this service, rather than somebody who's there to kind of drive up the share price and profitability and stuff like that. I think he's very much approaching it from the perspective of a music fan, which I really like that. And I think that's a really interesting, it's a really good breath of fresh air, because you speak to these people and they speak in kind of corporate terminology, and it's all a bit bland. It's about curation and user experience, and a lot of that stuff that doesn't mean anything. And I think he kind of puts it in human terms, which I like.
Yeah,
I think it goes back to the Beats headphone product strategy, which is to speak an emotional and cultural language rather than a technical and economic language. So Beats headphones are aspirational. They're big. They're statements. They're something you wear, and the same bass that is booming and excessive to most grown-ups is exactly right to the heart of the cultural language of hip hop and contemporary pop and R&B. So Beats headphones succeeded by speaking the cultural language very well.
Yeah.
So by hiring Ian, who's a passionate guy who genuinely loves music and who has good ears, and who has real ears, and he's into it. He really genuinely loves music with his heart. By hiring him, Beats kind of put music and emotion and feeling and art at the center of their pitch and of their market statement. And that's really their value proposition in a lot of ways. We are about music and art, feeling, emotion, style, social life, and all those other things that you're really seeking by potentially acquiring this product.
No, that makes absolute sense. And yeah, I mean, last point on Beats, I want to ask you, Lucas. Do you feel like a lot of the technology over which the service was built was already there through Mog, and a lot of what they had to do was mostly on the design side and the curation side of the new application? Or do you think there was a lot of work in the background as well to change the tech to make the service work the way it does now?
I think. So I don't really know the inside details of that,
Sure.
which is surprising because I know people who are very close to the process. Um, but I know that the engineering leads at Mog actually have not continued at Beats.
Right.
And the key data architect isn't there anymore. But that said, I think they probably use the back-end systems, the main Ruby on Rails app, and the Sinatra code, and whatever else was sitting around at that time as the core. Because dealing with the data components of a music service, no matter what your front end marketing message is a very nerdy job.
Right.
And to give an example, Mog really excelled at search. If you do a music search in Mog that's pretty sloppy, it's like Oliver Nelson Truth. If you'll get the right thing, Oliver Nelson and the search for the abstract truth, and because the album I'm thinking of. If you do the same thing on RDO, it'll look for an album with those 3 words in the title and totally bomb out, and Spotify and so on. So Mark did a great job with those core data components, and I imagine those were carried over.
Absolutely, that's really quite fun. And I remember, I had a TJ Fowler, I think the VP of product at Mog, back at a panel at South by in 2012, and they had a very determined and a great vision as to where they wanted recommendation to go. So I'm sure that when the company was picked up, there was already a vision of where that was going in